Hi, my name is Fawn Oates, and I'm a professor at Red Rocks Community College in Lakewood, Colorado. I'm here today to talk to you about the biology of sex differentiation. So, it's not a phrase that we hear very often, at least outside of the world of biology. So, I teach psychology, and you may ask yourself, well, why is this community college psychology professor trying to tell me about how gender is created or how gender comes about in people? Well, that's a great question. One of the things I found is that the things that we know about gender, most biologists know. They have a really good sense of it that gender is a continuum. It's not a dichotomy. It's not one thing or the other. It's not male or female. It's everything in between. But biologists sometimes have a hard time talking to us non-medical biologist kinds of folks. And that's where I come in. So my job is to explain things that may be difficult or need a different level of knowledge to get, and be able to explain it to people who have never heard of it before, or maybe not even have some of the background information to apply. So I'm going to be talking about what biologists know and how we can understand it better. So I have created a model that I will put up on the screen. There it is, I'm sure. What it looks at is six different levels that are needed to create the idea of female or male. It's in human beings, though I'm sure most mammals, excuse me, have a very similar kind of setup. So the first one we're going to talk about is presence of chromosomes. Now, most of us are somewhat familiar with at least the idea of chromosomes, and if you've studied chromosomes at all, you probably have a good understanding that there is XX and XY. XX is generally female, and XY is generally male. But that's only one small part of the story. So there's XXY, which is present in Klinefelter syndrome, where you have either two X's in an egg or an X and a Y in a sperm. You can have XYY, which we call super males. Um, XXX doesn't get quite as fun a name. I think it should be super females, but it's not. It's called triple X syndrome. And XY, which is Turner syndrome, where the other chromosome is missing. So there's only one X. So what this shows us, and what this has come upon, the Olympics have found this out as well, is that chromosomal testing for gender doesn't really cut it. There's a lot of different variations to this, and once you get a sense of the variations, it's hard to um, think of gender as just XX and XY. So the next thing we're going to look at is recognition of chromosomes. So it's one thing to have the chromosomes in your body, but it's another thing to actually have your body operate on that. So there was, I'll tell you a couple of things. So the first one is this case of, it was in vitro fertilization. So they took the egg, they took the sperm outside of the body, they put it together, they allowed it to grow, they tested it, and one of the things they test is chromosomes. So this little baby was XY, and they said, "Okay, you're having a boy." And the baby grew in the womb. The baby was born, definitely female genitalia. They did surgery to make sure that the genitalia was that there was not male genitalia inside of the baby, and there wasn't. Looked like working ovaries. Now we don't know if this baby will grow up to have functional ovaries, if that they'll be able to reproduce. But that was very surprising, right? So this kid, definitely XY, definitely appears female in the body. So one of the things that we know is that with XX, we have something called X inactivation, which means one of the X's the body doesn't really operate on. So it picks one of them, it starts forming kind of based on that X. The theory is that because this can happen with an X chromosome, that sometimes maybe it can happen with a Y chromosome too. So you can be born XY, but if the body doesn't actually operate on that Y, if that Y has become inactivated, then the baby would grow up feminized. The body would be feminized, which is kind of the go-to of development. that if the body isn't getting signals to develop as male, it'll develop as female. So the third aspect to look at is the presence of hormones, excuse me, presence of hormones. So again, you probably have a good understanding that hormones contribute to our gender, but in what way? How does that happen? So one thing that is kind of across the board is that this idea of male and female hormones is a bit of a misnomer. I mean, it's not shouldn't be really called that because I, as a female, have testosterone in me, and if you are watching and you are male, then you have estrogen in you as well. So it's all about amounts. So as a female, I haven't got myself tested, but perhaps my estrogen is higher than my testosterone, right? For most males, their testosterone will be higher than their estrogen. So if that isn't happening, if those hormones aren't present, especially during development, then the um, how the baby develops can change. So the example that I use is there's something called hypogonadal syndrome. Hypo means too much. Excuse me, too little. Sorry. Hyper means too much. Hypo means too little. I told you I wasn't a biologist. Anyway, so hypogonadal syndrome means that the body is making little to no hormones. It depends on the severity of the syndrome, and it's the same thing as any of these aspects. It's on a continuum. So some people they can make less than normal. Some people can make none at all with this syndrome. Excuse me. Um, so if those hormones aren't there, then the body develops differently, and often with hypogonadal syndrome, um, they're just not making large amounts of what either estrogen or testosterone. In the fourth one, it's recognition of hormones. You probably see a theme here, a pattern going. So with the recognition of hormones, um, just because the body has the hormones doesn't mean that the body operates on it. So an androgen insensitivity syndrome, what happens is the androgens, which is what we consider male hormones, like testosterone is one of them, that these androgens just aren't being accepted by the body. They aren't being recognized. So that your body is insensitive to these androgens. So what happens is that as a baby develops, it, as I said, the go-to is female. So a baby boy uh, is developing. He doesn't get the testosterone, or the testosterone. The body's not accepting the testosterone, and so what happens is he develops as female. So even though he's XY, no question about that, he also develops as female. Uh, Fifth aspect is brain structure. We call this neural gender. Um, so there are many parts of our body that are sexually dimorphic, meaning can be masculinized or feminized. And remember, it's everything is on a continuum, so it's not one or the other. So they're in a either more masculinized or more feminized, or in the middle. So if my one of the things that we know is that when we're developing in the womb, at 6 weeks of development, we develop or start to develop our body dimorphism, meaning we're becoming either male or female. At 12 weeks of development, good 6 weeks after this point, we get a switch in our brain, which is usually either from the Y chromosome or the lack of a Y chromosome, to tell us to either develop our brains as male or female, masculinized or feminized. Right? And there's 1,000 different ways that this can happen in our brains. It's not just one switch that, yep, you've got a girl brain, you got a boy brain. A whole bunch of things can be either more masculinized or more feminized or somewhere in the middle. So lots of differences, lots of individualization that happens here. So the theory is that we know these two things happen, right? We know that it happens at 6 weeks of development. We know that it happens at 12 weeks of development. So with people who identify as transgender, if we apply this to them, then that makes sense, right? Is that at 6 weeks of development, I get this signal to develop as a male. 12 weeks of development, I don't get that second signal develop as female or as male, so my body develops as female, right? So my brain is developing as a female, but my body is developing as a male. that is everything that that trans people um, describe in their experience. The final aspect is genital structure. Some models will put this as two different things, as internal and external structure, because that does happen at different time periods, and there are different things that go on with that. But I combine them into one, so uh, for ease. So it's both the physical and the genital anatomy, both the internal and external. But the variation I'd like to talk about with this is 5-alpha reductase deficiency, or more simply, DHT deficiency. So with this variation, a couple of things are happening, right? So on the Y chromosome is a gene called the SRY gene. I like to call it, because I'm Canadian, the sorry gene. Sorry. It helps me remember. So the SRY gene um, creates this souped up testosterone called DHT. It's really, really, really powerful, and it creates it in the womb so that the body develops masculized. So it makes the penis grow outward and become outward penis, right? And it does two things really. It creates the outward penis, and it tells the internal structures what to do. So one thing they tell the structure to do is to stop with there's two sets of structures in your genitals before 6 weeks of development. There's the Mullerian ducts and the Wolferian ducts. The Mullerian ducts would go from the um, ovaries to the vagina. The Wolferian ducts would go from the testicles to the penis. So it tells the Mullerian ducts, stop forming, stop doing what you're doing, just go away. And it tells the Wolferian ducts, yes, more of you, like keep doing what you're doing, right? So internal and external, it's working on these things, right? But the DHT is required to get the external part. So to create the penis, you need this DHT, right? At least in the womb. So fast forward to puberty. So the person is born, they're XY, right? So they're chromosomally male, but they're born female. They look female. They're nothing would have you guess anything else. Puberty hits. The internal structures have been developed. That doesn't take DHT. So the testicles are internal and there. Okay. They start to pump out a bunch of testosterone, as does with any teenage boy. Right? That's what happens. What makes puberty. But at this point, for this particular person, the amount of testosterone that they're making is so large that they don't even need DHT now. So now that testosterone starts to go to work on their genitals in a way that usually doesn't happen outside of development in the womb. So they're they start to grow a penis. So what looked like a clitoris is actually a penis. Um, what looked like vaginal folds is actually a scrotum, and so everything starts to go back to becoming a male genitalia. So I mean, even this idea that gender is fixed seems to be pretty far off when we actually look at the realities of biology. So now that we know the realities of biology, we don't ever have to think ever again in our lives that gender is either male or female. You're either a boy or a girl, and that's the end of the story, because we know well through the field of biology that that is not true. Uh, and so I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you pass it on to others.